Hey everyone, what's going on? Hope everyone's well. So this right here is an RD28 ETI from a 1998 Nissan GU Patrol, and what I'm going to be doing is swapping over from the electronic injection pump that it comes with from the factory to a mechanical pump off a earlier GQ RD28 Patrol. So that'll mean that you literally only need two wires to run the engine, one to the shut-off solenoid on the pump itself and then one to the starter motor. So anyway, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be loosening my timing belt off with the tensioner, yanking it off, and then I'll be unbolting my injection pump. So that'll involve cracking all the injector lines off. Just be very careful that there's no trap pressure stuck on the lines. There could well be, so just crack it loosely and then slowly undo it and sort of try and jiggle it to see if there's any pressure that'll leak out. Okay, so I couldn't get my gear to budge, so I've undone the 3 bolts that sit back here. There's 1, 2, 3 under there, and the holes that they have to go through are ovaled out like that, so you can rotate the pump and either advance or retard its timing. And as well as that bolt, there is 1 bolt under here. See if you can see that. Oh yeah, back in there, just there. So as just a normal bolt goes through that, and there's a nut tack welded on the back up under there, just where my finger is. So now that all the bolts are off, I should be able to just twist the nut onto this just to start and tap it through, and that should loosen the gear off. I'm going to change to a 2-armed bearing puller, and then hopefully that might crack this one off. Oh, there we go. Make sure you get your woodruff key. It'll focus. There we go. It's come off now. Okay, so I've got my GU pump and then my GQ, both RD28 pumps, the GU being the ETI one, which is electronically controlled, which is stupid. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling apart the distributor cap off the GQ pump and pulling out the 9mm plunger from the GQ pump, and then pulling out the 11mm plunger from the GU pump and swapping that over so I get more fuel pressure, which will be nice. I'm also going to have to swap over the distributor heads, so these parts here with the ports on them for the fuel, because the cavity in the front of the head is made to the size of the plunger. So if you upgrade from a 9 to 11mm, you're going to have to change that head so that it'll all work properly. But anyway, I'm going to start by pulling off the top assembly so I can show you the throttle, how that works, as well as the governor and all of that. So I'm going to record a voiceover from a little bit, just because as I was pulling the pump apart, I didn't fully understand its operational characteristics and principles. So there's a little throttle position sensor up on top I've got my hand on. I don't know why the GQ used them. I thought they were fully mechanical, but I assume it's just for something to do with the AC, or not too sure if I'm honest. You're not going to need it on the GU though. I'm going to make my own idle up feature with a little hand throttle. You can see the assembly that my right hand's got there. The only 2 wires coming off it should be the fuel shut off and the
throttle position. The boost compensator on the top, that doesn't raise fuel pressure, that allows more fuel flow as the boost pressure increases. I'll talk about that later down the track when I put together a video on how to tune the pump up. But yeah, just all you need to really know for now is that it doesn't actually increase pressure, it allows more flow of the fuel as the pressure comes onto the diaphragm and the spring is compressed. So you've got the fuel inlet just there and the fuel outlet just there, from the entire pump assembly back to the rail, and that little barb there joins on from the spill rail. Down here is the advanced assembly. So what that does is it is a hand actuated assembly meant for a cold start, and what it'll do is it'll rotate where your dynamic rolling elements are and move the actual position from where they are, meaning the pump's stroke will change, or where the pump's stroke starts will change, even though the pump is bolted stationarily to the car, and that'll advance the timing or retard it depending, and allow cold starts in very cold weather. And this is just a little idle up feature here. So when talking about pumps, the two most important things you need to understand is the difference between pressure and displacement. So pressure is the amount of pressure per area. So the easiest way to visualize that is think in PSI, or pounds per square inch, or if you're a metric boy, kilograms per meter squared, or whatever size you're measuring. So it is an amount of force per area. The other thing we need to understand is displacement. So when we're talking about pumps, the main goal of a pump is to displace liquid. It's not to create pressure. Pressure in turn comes with displacement as it backs up when your pump forces out more liquid than is able to travel along a certain size orifice or able to displace into a certain sized cavity. So the diesel pumps here, the VE style pump, it creates pressure by displacing liquid into a injector line. So it's got a calculated length down the end where the plunger is in the hydro head. So it will compress the liquid, but it will compress it to a certain point, which will be the cracking pressure of the injectors. And once it's compressed to this point, the plunger will be moving forward, and the orifice size and the volume of the lines will allow that little rest of the liquid, instead of just compressing, to displace into the injector line and then be squirted into the engine. So I hope I explained that well enough for you people to understand, but we can see here I've got the top off the pump, so the top cover off the pump, and we'll talk about the things inside the pump now. So as soon as you get the top off the injector pump, there's going to be a few things evident on the top. So we'll talk from the top down as I begin to strip it down. Again, this is a voiceover, so it might be a little bit hard to line up, but I'll do my best. So on the very top, we've got the throttle spindle, which is the little part that I'm going to grab with my fingers. It's got a little O-ring that seats in on a ground surface and creates a seal to stop diesel leaking back through. So the throttle spindle actuates the correction lever, the correction lever being the one that will connect the throttle spindle down to the metering sleeve. And the little spring on the throttle spindle is the governor spring. And that works in turn with the governor assembly below with the flyweights in it, which we'll talk about as well. So the throttle spindle just lifts off. It's got a little cutout in it, which you can line up to pull it off. So the correction lever here is a two-part lever, which connects from the governor assembly with the weights in it and the push rod, and will connect directly down to the metering sleeve and transfer both the inputs from your throttle and the governor there down to the metering sleeve. So if you look down the bottom there, maybe it'd be a little hard to see. You've got the metering sleeve down there. It's the little yellow one. I'll put an arrow on it. And what that does is it sits on the outside diameter of the plunger and modulates the amount of diesel that you're going to send through your injector line into your injector and into your combustion chamber. So this on top here, this is the governor assembly, which has flyweights in it. And what this does is this itself is what limits the RPM the engine is going to do. So as it spins up to RPM, as it's directly connected to the main cam follower or cam ring, the weights will fly out like so, and the push rod will push against the correction lever and effectively put it to 0% throttle and move the metering sleeve to a point where it won't allow pretty much any diesel flow into the engine, which will stop your engine over revving.
And so next to that, we've got the tensioning lever. So this lever is what's pushed by the fuel screw in the top cap of the injector pump, and if that moves the entire dynamic position of the metering sleeve relative to the correction lever. So you can see if I push back on this assembly, it moves forward the entire assembly of the metering sleeve, and that will not change the correction lever. So even if your governor is up at 5,000 RPM, the weights have come out and pushed against the correction lever, cutting off fuel flow. If your throttle is still at 100%, your foot's to the floor, what is going to happen is the spring on the throttle spindle up the top is going to compress, and it's not going to hold the correction lever fully open, as the correction lever's tension is more than the spring from the weights of the governor pushing out against it. To undo the bolts on the top of your rotor head, you've got to use one of these. It's called an impact screwdriver, and I borrowed this off a bloke at work, and it didn't have any bits in it. So what I did was I cut down an 8mm Allen key and then filed it into the shape of a flathead. So yeah, these have a little cam in it, so when you hit the back, it'll rotate the front just the tiniest bit. So you hit the back with a hammer and it'll just crack open any nuts or any screws. So once you pull your distributor head off, or your rotor head, whatever people call it, you'll have two little springs in here. They'll probably fall down in there. I've stuck mine in with a bit of grease. But these springs push against the flapper that your fuel screw actuates. These are your spring stem and buttons for your piston, for your plunger. So just pull them out together. You can just sit them down in here if you want. And then you're going to have your plunger assembly next. So your plunger, let me just move this, sorry. I've got one stripped here from the GU pump. Plunger has this collar come off, and then this one, and then this one with its tabs facing up against the back of this one here, and then this one here. And then after that, down in here, you've got your little shim. Got your little shim here, which sits on your cam here. So something to note, if you look down in there, you'll see your rolling elements, the 4 of them around there, and you see that there's two keys, I'd call, 2 chuck keys, and then the spring in the middle. So this one has 2 chuck slot keys that slot into those 2 down there. And you see that little dowel pin there? That's what locks into the back of your plunger there and keeps it in the right timing. So that dowel pin there is in line with, is opposite to one of these chuck keys, but because of that, see that one chuck key there? That's got a line etched into it. So that one lines up with your dowel pin like that, just to make sure, because you could technically install this 90 degrees out and then bad things could happen. Your cam has crests and valleys machined into it, and so when the valley rides on those rolling elements, it gets pushed in, and as it rotates out, it gets pushed up by one of the lobes, and that in turn pushes your plunger back and forward, which pressurizes and then rotates and releases the pressure in the end of your distributor head, which then sends your high pressure diesel to your lines. So there's a spring down the center here, nothing special, just a spring. Puts resistance on the plunger and the cam, which is working against the spring tension from the plunger itself against the distributor head. And your rolling elements have a button on the front and then 2 sleeves going into a dowel pin like that, and they're symmetrical so you can install them either way. Now, these don't need oil because your whole pump cavity is filled with diesel, which itself is a lubricant. And then under everything else, you got this one here. I'm not going to bother pulling that out because you don't need to. But yep, that's a rundown of everything in the GQ pump. So it's relatively simple when you think about it. Not too much can go wrong, and it's not too hard to disassemble. So hope that helps everyone out in case you've dropped yours into little pieces. So the only modification, the only major modification you have to do, so this is the GQ 9mm rotor head. So because this cavity has to be a large diameter to suit your, there's your 9mm and here's your 11mm. You can see there's a size difference there. So your 11mm won't fit in to that hole. That's because in your GU pump, this is the 11mm hole. However, because your GU doesn't have the fuel screw and mechanical stuff, there's no holes next to the intake on your distributor head. See here, there's no holes, and on your GQ, there's holes for your springs here. So the only modification you have to do is work out the depth of these holes and then drill some into your GU head. And you don't have to worry, they don't have to be perfectly exact. Just try and eyeball them and get them the measurements for them as best as you can, because all they're going to do is hold the springs down as much as they sit in this one and press against the back of your fuel screw flapper there. So yep, that's everything that you need to do. I'm going to see if I can get mine done, and then I'll rebuild it for you all and show you how to do that. Okay guys, I've finally got the part machined here. I'll splice onto the screen now, or I'll put in the description my working drawing, because I machined this myself because that's my trade at work. But I'll explain it real quick in case anyone here is a machinist. Excuse my saliva. So I don't know if you'll be able to see, but the side of this here, it's not perfectly straight. It's slightly got like a slight pyramid shape to it, a slight triangle. So that meant I couldn't put it straight in a vise. So I just clamped it between two blocks of wood and set it up like this, which then allowed me to clock it up, setting it setting concentrically flat with the dial indicator around the very edge of it. And also to get it lined up with a perfect X-plane, I used these two holes here, and that lined it up pretty well. I then came and clocked up off the middle of here, the plunger hole, which got me directly in the center of the whole assembly. And then I'll cut on the screen, but I did some maths and calculated I had to come up 23.92mm, and then each hole is across 9.325mm either side. And you can measure yours up because mine aren't perfect, but I came down 13.25mm deep with the 8mm drill bit for the holes for the springs, and then the hole's got like a step in it so it can do that and move around. That's just a 10mm drill bit down 6.25mm. But yeah, I'll cut on to the screen and also probably link in the description a working drawing for it, so that you can give yours to a machinist and give him the drawing, and he should give it back to you perfect. But yeah, I'm gonna get this back together now, and I'll be able to put my 11mm plunger in the GQ pump and make some hectic boost. Okay guys, I'm about to go for a build with my pump. So I've got everything I need to build the mechanical GQ pump with the 11mm plunger. So I've just, as I said before, I've got my rotor head machined. So now, before I build it, I'm just going to visually inspect all the parts I have. So I'm going to inspect both the cam plates off the GQ and the GU pump, and then decide which one I'm going to use. It's pretty obvious that if you have two sets of parts at your disposal, you're going to use the ones with the least amount of wear. So yeah, I'll pull out all the rollers in there, those rollers down the bottom that the cam plate rotates on, as well as these ones, and just visually inspect which ones look better, and make a decision and then build it with them, and then walk you guys through it, and hopefully it's all good. So I've decided to use the cam plate from the GU pump. There's honestly no difference at all. It looks the tiniest bit shinier on the back. I've measured each crest in the cam plate on this one and then on the GQ one, and they're both the exact same. So yeah, and I'm going to run with the rollers from the GQ pump. Okay, so to build the pump, first things first, make sure everything's nice and clean and that your rollers and everything are in good working order. So when you're finally ready to build, the first thing you're going to install is this little spring here. This sits on the very bottom and puts resistance against the back of the cam plate. This cam plate here. So once you've cleaned your cam plate and you've lubed up the lobe face with a little bit of diesel, you can plop that down in there. Just note that there's a dowel pin here, and that has to line up with the dog with the notch marked on it. Yep, feel it seat in. Alright, next thing is this little spacer, little shim. Sits on the top of the cam plate. And then your whole plunger assembly can go in. So the way the plunger assembly is put together is, so first one is this ring without any notches in it, and you'll see there's a wear mark which lines up correspondingly to the bottom here. So that goes on just like that. Next one is this ring that has these notches in it, which allows diesel to get in and lubricate the faces. That's next. Then the spring button, you'd call it, the spring stem, and then the metering sleeve can go on. And make sure that the side with the taper on the inside there faces down. So once you've assembled your plunger, you're ready to put it in. And again, make sure that the side with the taper on the inside of the metering sleeve is facing the bottom, and that the side with the big taper is facing up towards the top of the plunger. And make sure it moves freely on there, doesn't bind up with anything. Once that's all sorted, you can sit your springs on. And then you get your springs here, and you just sit a bunch of grease on the bottom and sit them in the holes so they won't fall over when you tip this upside down. And then you line everything up so that it'll all go together nicely when you go for your build. Once it's all together, you can sit your springs in, sit your screws in, and bring everything together, and you'll be able to see the function of everything once it's all screwed down. Don't use your impact screwdriver yet, just get it nice and flush with the screws just like it is, and then you'll give it a go after. So once you've built everything, just make sure it functions like it used to before. Now, when I originally got this together, I've had to fool around with it a bit. Before the assembly would move forward and get stuck like that. But you just got to like move it around a bit, and I ended up rotating the end of mine with my spanner a bit. And after a while, it frees up a bit. I think it's just because there's a bit of excess oil on the plunger, and the metering sleeve's just getting a bit galled up on that and stuck up. So just install the O-ring on the top cover, just wet with a bit of grease or a bit of oil. And then grease up the O-ring on your throttle spindle there. And once that's all good and you're happy that it's all clean and that, just slide that one on like that. And then before you put the top cover on, make sure you wind out the fuel screw all the way. And then slide the throttle spindle up through it. like so. Give it a push up with your little finger. Once you're happy with that, you can go ahead and put it together. Then once you're happy with that, you can go ahead and do your bolts up. Make sure that your main fuel screw adjuster flap is pushed up against the shoulder of that fuel screw here. The way you do that is you wind it out all the way and you bring it on at this angle, and that sort of pulls it on. And again, make sure that your throttle spindle is seated into that little ravine. And make sure when you spin your throttle, you can hear the governor flaps actuating. So yeah, I'm happy with that. My O-ring has been all oiled up and nice, so I think we're pretty good now. Okay, so to install the throttle, you got this one here. This one goes on the bottom. There's like teeth it locates on that sit in these grooves here. But yeah, so that goes on the bottom. And then this spring clips on the bottom like that. And next, you have this one. This spring goes on it like that. And then this one locates it all. And a little relief on the bottom of this one. That one there sits on this groove here. So this top spring comes around the back here. It's a bit of a pain to get on, but the bottom spring I've unhooked from here. And now I'm gonna grab it with pliers and see if I can yank it around. Okay, so I've just tightened up the cap screws, or sorry, the impact screws on the front of the injection pump with the impact screwdriver. I did them up just hand tight with a normal screwdriver, and then put a black mark on them with a paint marker, and then just gave them a good few hits, I think about up to 90 degrees. But yeah, just really give them a send so you make sure it seats properly. One of the last things you've got to do before you whack your pump back on the car is rip this cam plate off. I don't think it's called a cam plate, but pretty much what it is it's a plate that bolts to the bottom of the pump, and it's got an ovalled out hole which allows you to clock the pump to advance or retard the timing. So you've got to rip that one off because the one off your GU one is a different profile. You can see it's got that valley in it because a sensor sits right here on the GU one. So yeah, just rip your one off the GU and make sure you get the hardware as well, because that spaces it out the correct depth so that you can bolt it up to this fella here, which has the bolt hole. This is one of the other huge pieces in the puzzle to swapping over to the mechanical pump. So this is off a TB42 GQ Patrol, I believe. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and rip the old pedal out of the GU and see if this one will fit in, and see if I have to drill a hole in the firewall for that throttle cable. It was an absolute pain to get out. These two bolts were fine. This one was a bit more of a pain. I needed my long extension on the 1/4" drive socket with a swivel joint. And then this one up here was the biggest pain. I got that out by putting a swivel extension just on the 10mm and then pulling it down just here and then putting extra extensions. You can't get it over the back because of this getting in the way here. Yeah, so after you unbolt the throttle, there's this little plate you got to unbolt as well. It has two little 10mm bolts in it, and this plate sits up under here, and now you can see that hole up there with daylight coming through. So that's where you're going to run your throttle cable through. So, that hole comes out just behind the brake booster in there. So what's going to go through that hole here is this jingamahoo, which is off the TB42 cable. So I believe when it's inside, you got to run it from the inside out, because the bolts go through the back here and this gasket seats against the inside of the footwell. But I believe it sits like this because this tab would get in the way of the cable and the throttle itself, but I will have to check. Okay, so the throttle cable is in. Here it is. It comes through the firewall just next to the brake booster. And this, as I said before, is the TB42 from a GQ cable. And that should be just long enough to mount onto the new pump. So you can see the pedals mounted cool. It's got good travel on it. And if we look under here, whoa, it's got two bolts there. Throttle's mounted, looks sick. So yeah, I am ready to get cranking with the pump and the engine, and everything should be good. Okay, so fast forward quite a bit. I've got the engine in the car now and I've got it running. So I'll just talk through some of the stuff you've got to change when you've got the GQ pump on it. Oh, beg your pardon. So first things first, the GQ pump is going to come with a throttle spacer plate on it for the throttle cable, and the throttle cable I put in mine is off a TB42E from a GQ, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but I've had to weld and space out where the throttle holder grabber thingy sits in relation to the cable. I think because the TB42 cable is a bit longer, you've got to adjust for the slack in it, but I've just extended that about 35-40 millimeters in between here and here, because that hole there is meant to bolt through this bolt here. So I just did that. The TB42 cable works now. I get the full swing of the throttle assembly on the pump. As far as glow plugs go, mine wouldn't start back up. I think because the ECU needs certain inputs from the sensors to allow the glow plug circuit to kick on. So what I've had to do is bypass the glow plugs manually, cut out the wires from the ECU and then earth them separately through a button on the dash. So yeah, when you press that button on, you'll hear the glow plug relay tick over here. And yeah, as well as that, you just need power to the 12-volt solenoid. So what I've done for that is I've tapped into the 12-volt for my wiper motor, and I've got that to tick this relay open, which is connected straight to a 12-volt source from the battery. And that runs 12 volt to both my shut-off solenoid and my fans. Okay, so I've read around online, and the way you get your RPMs working supposedly is... So this is the original cam sensor, it's called. It's not actually sensing the rotation of the cam, but it senses the rotation of the injector pump, which has the same number of teeth as the cam gear, which means it'll rotate at the same speed and the same velocity. So it picks up off the back of the roller ring with a single slot in it. This runs to a 3-wire plug, which has 3 wires, white, black and grey coming off it. So apparently you have to undo this plug. Mine's jammed, so I'm going to have to fool around with it. But this plug, if you unplug it, you can shave a little bit off it here and there, and it will then be able to plug straight into this plug down here, which runs to your factory crank sensor. So I'm going to identify which direction the wires will sit if you did just plug it straight in, and then I'll resolder my cam sensor wires and tee them into where the factory wires go. Yeah, so the plugs in my harness are completely jammed together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my wires because, I mean, it's not working anyway. I'm going to crimp on some of these Deutsch plugs. Oh, they're not really Deutsch plugs, they're Chinese knockoffs of Deutsch plugs. So they come with their own pins and their own grommets to seal up. But their build quality and QC quality is pretty poor. But I'm going to try and film it because I don't know if I've filmed crimping these on before. I'll fast lapse it just so you get the idea. You can slow it down in the YouTube section if you want. I've pushed a bit more into the pump timing, advanced it a bit because it was a bit hard to start while I was fooling with it. I thought it was a bit too knocky, but looking back on videos it just sounds fine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start it up, let it get a bit of heat into it, and if I'm brave enough I'll take it for a burn up and down the block. That should about cover everything that I need to in this video. I'm going to start putting together a video on how to tune the pump up now since it's running. If you enjoyed the video, leave a comment, leave a like and share it around because it's good fun making these, and you know, the more people I can help out and the more people that can learn from my mistakes and my wins, you know, it's pretty much the goal of the channel. So yeah. Let us know if you enjoy the content, and feel free to watch some other videos. I got a lot on the RD28 and a lot on the eBay Turbo Hilux. So yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a like, and see everyone later.